Welcome to this episode of The Edge, Ali and my podcast, where we talk about everything teams and leadership related. Today we thought we'd talk about trust. It's a really cornerstone of teams. I think everyone knows that intuitively. And yet it's one of those enigmas, isn't it, Ali, that teams are often battling with. How do you build trust? What is it exactly? How come different people approach it differently? How do we know if we've got high levels of trust in this team? What does that give us even? Like, what's the benefit of having that trust? So where should we start? Let's talk about what is trust, Ali? What do you think it is?
Oh, well, trust is fundamentally a very human feeling, isn't it? It's like, I trust you and do you trust me? So it's something about, it's very innate to us. I think it's something that comes from our very ancient beginnings as a species, and it's all about our safety. And we know it's important. So we fundamentally know that it's really important. It helps settle us, makes us feel that we can think better. And it's something that teams and leaders and individuals want. We want to be surrounded by people we trust and who trust us as well. So I think people want to be trusted as well. There's very few people who say, I don't care about anybody trusting me. I think people want to be trusted just as they want to be able to trust others. It's not a nice space to be in when you don't trust anybody around you. It's a high alert state. So that's where all your body will be on high alert, wondering where you're going to get attacked from next. So it's, not a long-term solution to be in that kind of environment. So people will leave or burn out or get sick in those low trust environments. So I think it's important from an individual perspective. It's something that we innately want and look for. I think it's really important for high performance in a team. You cannot get and sustain high performance without trust across the team. And it's something that organizations want, because they want to know that people are going to deliver what they say they're going to do. They want to know that people are going to stretch and take on the extra mile and grow and develop in the future. And it's about being engaged in the business. So people are not going to be fully engaged if there's no trust. So I think it operates and has benefits at all levels. But how does it manifest itself, Jenni, do you think, trust?
In teams, do you mean, and at work? You and I both pay a lot of attention to how it shows up in teams in particular, but of course this is something that's universal in all our experiences as human beings working with anybody, whether they're part of our team or not. And the thing I notice about trust is that it's a one-to-one thing. So you and I have a level of trust that's built up over lots of years of working with each other, decades now, so it's quite a predictive trust for us, but it's also it's what we would call reliability based trust to start with, wasn't it? Through working with each other on projects and through getting to know how each other works. We're completely different people. We both approach work really differently, and that drives us both a bit nuts, doesn't it, about each other's working styles at times. But we also appreciate the strengths that each other's brings. That's a really important part of what we call reliability based trust. But also it's gone to a deeper level between us as well. So I would say that we've got vulnerability based trust as well, and that's where we can disagree with each other, sometimes quite considerably, sometimes quite violently.
It doesn't happen very often, but it can happen.
It really doesn't happen very often, because we're both quite, what's the word I'm looking for? We don't do conflict overtly very often with anybody, but there's also something where we can go there, and sometimes it goes too far, and we can apologize to each other and come back from that.
Yeah.
And that's what vulnerability based trust. That's saying sorry. That's admitting a mistake. That's asking for help. That's being able to take a risk, with each other as well. And so that's the kind of trust that high performing teams have. And because it's a one-to-one thing, they invest in those one-to-one relationships over lots and lots of people in the team, say 10 people in a team, to the point where they could describe that team environment as a high trust environment universally.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I would kind of describe as happening in a team context. Is you want at least that reliability based trust happening in a team. That's when you get a really good. It's a good feeling to have, to be able to rely on your colleagues, to be able to predict how they're going to behave, to know what their strengths and their styles are going to be, their preferences. But then if you really want to take it to the next level, and certain types of teams need to do this to be high performing,
Yeah.
then you need a much deeper level of trust than that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's a lot to take it to that vulnerability based trust. I think, you get some leaders or organizations saying, "Oh, we'd like you to come in and run a session on trust," and it's sort of, we can do that, but trust does take a longer time to happen, because it is such a human deep experience, that it's not just something you switch on. I mean, we talk about building trust with people. So it is more like building trust. And I think there's layers of trust. So you might trust somebody to do their job, and that's one tick, and then there's, the next level up. So I think people have to experience each other, and then they can slowly start to expand out what they'll trust each other on, which is interesting. But there's also other people who have different levels of trust. So just like we have, our space around us that we, like to keep private, and that's different for different individuals. So it is with trust too. So some people trust much more quickly with a much wider range of things than other people who might trust on quite a lot little things, and it takes a long time just to get that bit, and then suddenly you'll get the whole lot. So there's different ways that people respond to building trust, and what they'll give, and how quickly, and how it works. And so we can't assume that we're all the same in a team, which adds to the fun of it, let's face it.
It does, and I think you and I are actually really good examples of these two extremes, aren't we, Ali? That and often when I'm teaching a group about trust, I will use us as examples, and we create the Jenni versus Alison line that we then get the whole group to stand on as to where they are in relation. I did it with a group the other day. Actually, it was a really nice conversation. But it's a nice thing to explore as a team: is what are the individual approaches to trust, and how might they differ? So, at one extreme, you've got me, Jenni, the Jenni type.
The
Yeah, it's a new
Jenni type.
psychological type that's out there.
Yeah.
The Jenni type. And I jump into trust with both feet. So any relationship with anybody, at work, whatever, I will go, I start with the position of I trust you, and then I work back from that. So, I give everything. I'm an open book. I'll tell you anything that you want to know, rightly or wrongly, right? But it would take, and it takes, if somebody then breaks that trust, they are dead to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that,
Like
they
that.
don't get a second chance, right? So, yeah. So little things, maybe I give them a little bit, but if they did one big thing, that's it. They're out, right?
Yeah.
How do you approach trust, Ali? And how's that
Well, I
different
don't
from what I
trust
do?
anybody at first meetings, no. So I'm a cynic, skeptic. Yeah, and it takes a bit to get in, and a little bit longer,
Not just a bit, Ali. It takes a lot.
Okay, so it takes a lot. Yes, so it takes a lot for me
It
to
takes
trust
a
somebody.
lot.
So it
I
takes
feel
me a
very
long
proud that I'm on
time.
the inner circle. Put it that way.
I know, but the thing for me is, which is different from you. So once you've earned my trust
Yeah.
and you're in the inner circle,
Yeah.
you could do
Oh,
almost
you are so
anything,
loyal. Yeah, yeah,
and you
yeah.
would
Yeah.
never be thrown out. I mean, you become
Yeah.
part of
You've
my
earned it, haven't
family.
you, by the time you get there?
And
Yeah.
so you could behave incredibly badly, and I would still be loyal, and you're in there, and I'd be with you. So, and you just
Because
think,
you've
really?
built it up over such a, your threshold is so high,
Yeah.
and you've tested them along the way. That's what I
Yeah.
observe, is you kind of test people and kind of see, okay, and there's
Yeah.
a point at which you go, right, I now trust them. I can say that they are in the inner circle, and that's it. They're there for life.
And they're there forever.
It's
And
powerful
yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
and I'm there with you, and that's it. And you're
Yeah.
in there. You won't ever get
Yeah.
thrown out. It would have to be something terribly illegal and bad
Really,
to
really
be thrown
awful. Yeah.
out of my inner circle. Yeah. But it's hard to
And
get
so
in.
well, that's it. The barrier to entry is really, really high for you, whereas it's pretty
Yes.
low for me. And then, but if you don't then meet the expectations, gone. So we are two extremes. I think not everybody is like us and so extreme on this on
Yeah.
either end. But so I think there's a line in between us, isn't there?
There
And
is.
people sit somewhere on their line, so they might be a bit more moderate somewhere in the middle, whereas it's kind of a bit of both. Maybe it depends on the situation and how
Yeah.
high stakes it is. And but people, I think this illustrates beautifully that you and I come from trust from very different perspectives, and yet we're business partners and have been for 7 years, and friends for a long time before that.
Yeah.
So I got into the inner circle a long time ago. Is what I
He's
want
in
to
the inner circle.
say. But so that you can still collaborate with people who have a very, very effectively who have different perspectives on trust to you. Ultimately, we both get to the same point, I think, with
Yeah.
trust. It's just a different strategy for getting there.
Yeah.
And so, and actually, that works beautifully in our partnership, where occasionally, I do recognise that my level of trust is not appropriate in some situations at work, and you come in and you go, you balance me out, and hopefully, I do the same for you as well in other situations.
I
I like to
know. So
think
I'm
we
like
probably
being
had a
super
conversation.
suspicious.
I'm like, give them the benefit of the doubt, Ali. So it can be really powerful, as I said, like to have that conversation as a team about how different people approach trust, to recognize that some people are Alisons and some people are Jennies or something in between, right? And
Yeah.
so how does that affect how you operate as a team and how you collaborate and how you build that collective trust together? A lovely example came up in this team that I worked with the other day, where we did this line and we stood on the line of the Jenni versus the Allies. And one guy was like, I'm out of the room with Alison on the other side of the building. And I was like, so would you ever get to the point of if trust? He's like, I was like, is it never? And he admitted that actually it's really, really hard for him to trust anybody, and that's good to know, isn't it? In a team context, there's not to say that's right or wrong. We shouldn't make any judgment about that. It just is.
Yeah.
It's part of his personality. It's who he is, and so how does a team then appreciate that, use it as the strength that it is, notice and help him to notice when that's overdone and becomes an issue in the team and a barrier to the team becoming a high trust environment, and what does he need to support him in that? So I think that can be a really, really powerful conversation to have.
And I think it's also a way of getting the team to understand what are the building blocks of trust. And say you don't say, why don't you trust me? Because that question is a really deep one, and it's multifaceted, and it takes time. So that's not going to build trust to put somebody on the spot like that. But understanding what the building blocks of trust are. So to what you'd mentioned earlier about that difference between reliability based trust and vulnerability based trust. So let's start with the reliability based trust and think about how we can make sure that all the components of reliability based trust, everybody knows how they behave, how they keep each other informed, and what they can do to build that with each other. And that helps people with the Jennies so that they don't then not do something that you're expecting them to do and get axed. And it helps their Allies where they need to get everybody building away so that eventually you can go, tick, you're up to level 1 now. You've still got another 10 levels to go, but you're moving in the right direction. So I think it's a bit like that. And seeing it as a journey of building trust and accepting that different people will move through these at different times. And that you won't get a team to suddenly go, ta-da, we're there. That it will take different people different amounts of time. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't do something for it. And it also means that we
Yeah.
can't just think, oh, we're going to do the leap of faith and we'll all trust each other.
I
That's
was
not
that
going to
was
happen, is
exactly
it?
what came into my mind as you were talking about that, Ali, about, teams often want shortcuts to these things. They want a quick fix to trust. And they often think that a team building day, off in the woods eating worms or making rafts or doing the leap of faith or something could be, or the trust fall. I've got a few videos
Yes.
about that I could share, of showing that going wrong. Uh, and I had people probably been in therapy for years as a result. But this is not actually what builds trust. What builds trust is actually the little things that happen on a day-to-day basis, that really make a massive difference to levels of trust that you have in your team. So, if we were to give advice on what action you could take as a team to build trust, it's have that conversation first of all, understand where people come from. That is a trust building exercise in and of itself. Talking about trust builds trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, because suddenly we understand, I don't know how long it took us to realise we had this really different approach. And you're probably getting really frustrated with me about, why I'm like, well, hey, come and join our team. Everyone's wonderful. And I'm getting really frustrated with like, oh, what's going on? Why does she hate everybody? Why? It's not that at all, is it? It's neither of those things. That's just the perception of it.
Yeah.
But, there's something about appreciating the difference that there is there and the benefits that that can bring.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is really powerful in teams is talking about team behaviours. What are our expectations of each other's behaviour in this team? How do we commit to behave in this team? So, for examples, if you think about some of the trust breaking behaviours that can happen, if you've got a team, and I see this a lot in teams where you have lots of team meetings, for example, you maybe have a weekly team meeting and regularly one person is sitting there doing their emails. You can't see this because it's hidden, it's down here, but that's that's what they're doing because you can kind of see it in their face. We know when someone's not really paying attention to what you're saying. That breaks trust because you believe what's the story you're telling yourself, which maybe or may not be true. They're not interested in what I've got to say. They don't value my contribution. They don't respect me, and so on. None of those beliefs and statements have any element of trust in them, do they? So there's something there about if we agree, however, that the behaviours that we demonstrate, one of the behaviours we demonstrate in this team is when we're in a team meeting on a Monday morning, we're present. That eliminates the likelihood of that person going off and doing their emails during that
Yeah.
meeting. They know that that's the time at which they have to be present. Or maybe the behavior is if we can't be present, we let people know and we don't even we excuse ourselves from the meeting because we know it breaks trust when we behave in that way and try and multitask. And so just having a conversation about that and agreeing that as a rule or an expectation in the team can be so powerful because it says what happens around here. How do we operate as a team and how do we make and making sure there's an element of how do we build trust in that. Really powerful.
Yeah. And I think, it is about conversations, and it's not necessarily about conversations talking about the word trust. It can be a lot more to do with how do we work together that shows respect,
Mm.
shares people's credibility. I'm thinking about the things that build up reliability based trust is,
Mm.
do I believe, can I respect you? Do I believe you respect me back? So though that's
Mm.
kind of a sense. I mean, you can't say to
Yeah.
somebody and make it happen, respect me. So what makes us respect somebody else? It's because
Yeah.
we believe that they've got knowledge and experience that we think is impressive or useful. So therefore we need to know what knowledge and experience that person has. So there needs to be some level of sharing of, what somebody's learned and done in their career
Mm.
and in their job and some of their achievements and things that they're proud of. And there also needs to be some recognition from other members of the team of what that person does really well. So, activities like looking at Strengths Finder or building on strengths or understanding successes, team successes, is all useful things for building up that credibility and the respect across each other, sharing challenges that the team have faced and individuals have faced and what they've done to overcome them. Again, it's about us understanding what they've done. So that builds up that respect and that credibility. The other thing is people, behavior is about committing to do something and doing it, and not just, never doing it, forgetting it completely. And so that's something that, team members need to be able to call out each other. And sometimes we might need to say, well, actually, we want it done by this time because, for example, if I ask you to do something, you're on it straight away and it's done. If you ask me to do something, I'll be like, yeah, sometime soon. So, and sometimes I know you're thinking, well, when is she going to do that? And I'm thinking it's moving up my list. But that
Amex
doesn't always.
bills. That's one that's outstanding, by the way, everybody.
I know. It is moving up there. So
I
it's,
do trust we will get there. I know it's on your list.
it's
It's
on
not.
my list.
And I'd tell you if it was urgent, right? I'd be like, I need it by this Friday, Ali. Hurry up. And I don't, by the way.
I know you don't need it by this
By
Friday.
next Friday, yes.
But it is, but I think that's an important thing about reliability-based trust, which is we might have different ways of working and approaching our tasks, but you have to actually be able to call each other out if you need something sooner, or know that those things are going to get done, because otherwise you're not going to trust somebody if they just don't deliver. And
Absolutely.
that is a real problem with trust. So I think teams need to put in place those behaviors so they're the building blocks of trust.
And I see a lot of impatience in teams. I think we kind of talked about this, but impatience for what end? They want to get the benefits of trust. They know what those benefits are. They see them. They intuitively know. We all know what the benefits are. And they probably want to be problem solving at a different level. They want to be having constructively challenging conversations that make better decisions. You can understand them wanting to do that, but if they haven't even got reliability based trust yet, they can't go there yet. Yes. So there's something about being able as a team to put the building blocks in place first of trust. Constructive challenge requires deep levels of vulnerability based trust. You've got to be able to disagree well without it going into destructive conflict, or if it does, to be able to come back from it. You've got enough, if we fall out, we've got enough to come back to. We've got that foundation there that kind of keeps it solid. If you're doing that in a team where the foundation's not even solid, you're just going to break the team. And so knowing how to walk before you can run, I think, is really, really crucial when it comes to trust.
And sometimes in teams, you have little pockets of people who really trust each other because they've worked together for years, or they've known each other for years, and they can look like cliques and they can feel quite excluding to others, because when there is deep levels of trust, you feel really safe. You kind of know what the other person's thinking, doing. You can rely on them. They've always got your back. And for those that are excluded, whether they're a Jenni or an Ali, doesn't matter. They still feel it. They can tell the difference. But you can't just suddenly say, right, well, you and you're now in. It doesn't work like that. They still have to earn the trust, or build the trust with everybody. So I think there's something that you have to work on as a team to consider, right, there are some people who really trust each other. How do we all get higher levels of trust? Because not everybody is going to move straight into that vulnerability-based trust that some of those cliques might have. But they can still move further on if we start to work on that reliability to start with. And you need also to think about new people joining. If nobody knows them, how do we get them in those good places too?
And I think that so many of what we call our edge dynamics, we talk about 5 things that are really conditions for success in a high performing team. Trust sits under relationships, so that's one of the edge dynamics, and yet trust also relies on the other edge dynamics to varying extents. So, for example, clarity of results. What are we accountable for delivering as individuals, as a team, and how does that connect to the organizational results? Really, really important. If you don't have clarity, it actually degrades trust.
Yeah.
because you get duplication of effort happening, or, weird collaboration happening where, it's kind of like really unclear as to who's working on what, and that
Or
just
things
degrades
fall
trust,
through
doesn't
the
it?
cracks, and that's
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
yeah. Oh, then everybody's like, "How come that happened? You should have done that." No, that's it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
that's not a personal thing, that's a contextual thing that actually could so easily be addressed if you just created
Yes.
more clarity in the team. Your routines can be really degrading of trust. For example, your team meeting on a Monday morning, is it a round robin where everybody says their bit for 5 minutes and you sit there resenting the person who took 7 minutes rather than five, or said exactly what somebody else had just said, or as I said earlier, just they're busy doing their emails, not really listening. These routines and how you do them, how you communicate with each other, how are your emails? Are you CCing everybody on everything, which suggests that you might not trust the person that you're that's how I read it anyway, that you're sending it to. These are all examples of routines and routines can either build or erode trust. So think about and design your routines well so that you maximize the chances of building trust in your team, and so on, right? Resilience, how much workload does everybody have in the team? This is a lovely example of resilience as we would define it,
Yeah.
or one of the things that defines it anyway. Is it quite uneven in the team? That can create resentment, distrust about why have they got so little to do and I'm absolutely overloaded and working till midnight every night. These kind of suspicions that we have of each other and what motivations are underlying that kind of activity,
Yeah.
becomes a really important part of this.
And I think managing those dynamics is a
Mm,
critical thing to not only sustaining the high performance of the team, but actually to sustaining and building trust over time. Because
mm,
trust is not fixed either once you've got it. So like you
mm,
said, people can do things that, so it's a movable feast as context changes and
mm,
all sorts of things. It really is uncovering layers of that deeper, complex human existence that we've got as we learn more about each other.
mm,
And thinking, how does that add into our understanding of who we are? So, really
mm,
using time to get to know people and to continually get to know
mm,
people is really critical.
mm.
And once you've got a deeper understanding, then you're more likely to be able to open up to the vulnerability based trust that we've been talking about,
Yeah,
which unlocks the high performance then.
yeah. And one final thing I think we should probably look at, which is people often ask me, what's the difference between trust and psychological safety? Psychological safety, I think, is something we hear a lot about. It's a bit, there's a buzzword, isn't there, around, or
Yeah,
buzzwords plural, around that phrase, at the moment. And the way I explain it to people is, trust is, we've talked about trust being a one-to-one thing. It's between you
yeah,
and I. And
yeah,
it's, if we think about our team, it's about my individual relationship and level of trust with each person in the team, the sum of which leads to a level of trust, the climate of trust that we have in our team, which I think is
yeah,
very high in our own team that we work in. And we work hard on it to make sure that it is high. It's an important part of what we do. The level of psychological safety is the output of that, I think.
yeah,
So whereas trust is a one-to-one thing, psychological safety is the many-to-many thing. So that's how I would describe that climate of trust in the team, is the level of psychological safety we have around here. And that's, if we so the person who's done the most work, I think, on this, or the most famous for it, is Amy Edmondson, who has done a lot of work on psychological safety, and she's got 7 factors which she looks for as indicators of psychological safety in a team, which include things like being able to admit mistakes, being able to ask for help, being able to take a risk in this team, and so on. Be yourself without fear of judgment, and lots of lovely things that if you can say yes to all of those things, you've probably got high levels of psychological safety happening in the team.
And you would only have high levels of psychological safety if you trusted
Yeah.
the people that you're sharing those things
Mm.
with, or giving them your ideas or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think trust is a prerequisite for
Mm.
full
It is.
psychological safety.
Yeah,
And,
one leads to the other.
you know, part of what happens is, you might feel safe for a bit, but then suddenly something happens and you go, what was that about? Yeah. I always remember a story of somebody who had a 360 feedback and had a really good relationship with their boss. And they sent their 360 to their boss, and had a really good conversation with them and everything. And in their annual performance review, were told that they were not meeting expectations anymore, but there were some really important weaknesses and they were taken out of their 360. And that was a big breach of psychological safety, as you can imagine. But it was a
Yeah.
breach of trust because they thought that
Yeah.
they were safe. They thought the person was using, their idea of the
Yeah.
discussion was all about development and it wasn't going to be used against them, but
Mm.
it was. And so sometimes, we think that we're safe and we think that we've got
Mm.
trust. But I think it's understanding that what we've just done is found out that maybe we'd made some
Yeah.
assumptions about how particular
Mm.
decisions were going to be made or how certain information was going to be used. And so that's where we actually sometimes need to clarify those assumptions before we move on. And you could say, well, that's you going
Mm.
back to your distrustful world, Ali. But it is part of that unlayering of the next level that we're going to in these
Mm.
conversations about how we work together and how we feel that we can describe our weaknesses and what's not working and our failures and be who we really
Mm.
are at work. And so it's not a once and done thing. So that's where we're going to do a
Mm.
psychological safety workshop for 2 days. Personally, I'd say you need to be working on this. Yeah, have two
Yeah, I
days.
would agree.
It will be
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah.
But that's just the start. And
Yeah.
actually, as a team and as individuals, you're going to have to unpeel the onions of everybody and build that vulnerability based trust based on all those building blocks of the reliability
Mm.
based trust. And eventually, you'll get to a place where you can discuss certain topics with psychological safety. But even then, it's not finished because, until you get to a place, and I'd say you and I have got complete psychological safety. It,
Mm.
it takes a long time and you have to test different waters as you're going through and then
Mm.
work out the assumptions and then you get there. So it is a long journey,
Mm.
but it's well worth it. I think the reward at the end is a place where you can really thrive and be your best, and be
Mm.
the best self that you can be. And you can support other people to be their best selves too. And from a human perspective, what more could we get from our work?
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
it's a wonderful place
And
to
I think
be.
there are some shortcuts as well. It doesn't have to. It often is naturally a time. It has been for us. We've worked together for, I don't know, probably 20 years or so. We've worked together and
Yeah.
known each other in different
It
contexts,
hasn't
right?
taken a
And been
full
business
20
partners.
years.
Yeah, no, we got there a lot quicker than that. But I think so it is natural for it to take a long time. However, you can do some shortcuts to that as well.
Hmm.
So just putting some deliberate effort into it, talking about it, agreeing behaviours, starting to work on it deliberately, taking deliberate action, I think is designing your routines really well, thinking about clarity levels that you have in your team. All of these things accelerate that process to getting to trust faster.
And I think it is an exponential thing as well. So once you
Mm.
start moving on it, it does speed up the
Yeah.
move towards, a more trusting, effective environment.
Yeah, this is true.
Mm.
So, on that note, that brings us to the end of this podcast where we've talked about trust in great detail. We talked about the two levels of trust, reliability and vulnerability based trust. We've talked about, how you build it in teams, the kinds of things that you can do, how you need to be thinking about beyond just the relationships in the team to some of your routines, for example, your results as another example, the resilience that you have in the team as well to build that trust up. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. I've enjoyed this conversation a
I've
lot,
enjoyed it
and we'll see you again
massively.
soon.
See you soon.